Without any further ado, here is Joe to launch a notable work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we're here to talk about Robert, the pipe organ, and the CD. Firstly, my experience with the pipe organ, and I'd like to dispel a few myths. Unlike most musical instruments, the pipe organ is commonly defined by the place where it is often played, the church. And people seem to think of organists as reclusive creatures in the lofts of basilicas and cathedrals. Another myth was perpetuated by Hollywood, who we can credit with relegating the organ to the lowly function of underscoring horror films. The Toccata and Fugue in D minor of Johann Sebastian Bach frequently suffers this association. For some, this music now conjures up the cliche of the haunted castle in moonlight. Outside, werewolves howl. Inside, in a cavernous, smoke-filled room, the petrifying silhouette of a bloodthirsty Count Dracula performs a Transylvanian polytonal death march on a three-manual organ. To some extent, I was guilty of such characterization until meeting my dear friend and colleague Maurice Boak, through whom I've had the pleasure of extending my acquaintance with the very interesting and quirky members of the organ-playing fraternity, many of whom are here tonight, on many a night at his house at Box Hill. Coming from a jazz background, my experience of the organ had also previously come from listening to Jimmy Smith records, the father of jazz organ. And I still enjoy those recordings whenever I catch a snippet of them here and there in a public place, usually a restaurant or elevator. So between the two members of the same instrumental family, one represented to me at the time an arcane and austere world, and the other the quintessence of hipness. Interesting bookends. How wrong was I about the former? I have since learned that the instrument is unique in its ability to produce a palette of sound colours with a vastness of dynamic range that no other instrument can rival. The music composed for it encompasses much more than what lies within the narrow parameters imposed by Hollywood. And dare I say it, as much as I adore J.S. Bach, who is my favourite composer, whilst the organ hasn't entirely cut its umbilical cord to the old master's aforementioned masterpiece, it has and continues to embrace music of such modernity that it too may be considered the quintessence of hipness. My education regarding the pipe organ was fast-tracked further through this lovely association with these wonderful new friends. I have since learned that I have much in common with these folk, since they are amongst the few in classical music today who still regard improvisation as an essential tool of the trade. Before, my background in jazz involved many years of playing the accordion. It was my first instrument, and I only switched to piano at the late age of 16. Those transient years between 13 and 16 were largely spent playing a small organ at dances, working for a man who could be characterised as the Guy Lombardo of Melbourne for about 40 years. Dennis Farrington, I don't know how many of you heard of him, but I started my apprenticeship with him at the age of 15, and I used to play left-hand bass. And it's a great teacher of rhythm. So in some small manner, I consider myself part of this fraternity of organ players, if you'll have me. Now to the music. It gives me great pleasure to launch the Gates of Vienna. There it is, by this wonderful man sitting to my right, Robert James Stowe. Luckily tonight we have no Draculas in our midst, and I'm hoping there shall be very little bloodletting. Instead, we shall be regaled by the charming, witty and talented Rob Stowe, who will recreate images of the old Vienna by way of organ music composed during the HABSBURG reign. Now, given that we don't have an organ music, and I'm assuming you're not going to sing all the parts, including the pedals, I think you're going to play us a recording? Or
I was going to play a track.
Are you going to play a track from the recording? So I hereby declare the Gates of Vienna launched.
Thank you. What could seem anything except an anticlimax after the iconic, in more ways than one, Joe Chindamo, to whom I'm extremely grateful for his kind words about my CD. And I'm also extremely grateful to all of you present here this evening for taking the trouble to come along to this event. It's in the middle of winter, it's in the middle of the week. Then it must have been extremely tempting to say, oh no, the hell with it, I'll just turn on Netflix. But no, you came here. Thanks very much indeed. Although the Gates of Vienna rolled off the presses less than a month ago, it was actually the culmination of 3 years' effort. Think of it, if you like, as a 3-year pregnancy, which only now has culminated in actual birth pains. It was back in 2015 that I initially had the concept of a CD, something like what you see now. At the time, I had no idea if anyone would be interested in such a CD. In addition, I had no idea if I'd be able to find the money or the leisure to make a CD possible. What did make it possible, though I didn't perceive this immediately, was my finally reaching a stage when, on both health grounds and employment grounds, I couldn't not make the CD. Before 2015, most of what income I derived from my journalistic and my copy editing work. It wasn't well-paid work on the whole, but it was steady work, and it kept me quite busy enough to rule out the notion of doing anything else very much, except for some paid organ playing. The year 2015, it turned out, was the year in which such earnings became impossible for me, partly because they became impossible for plenty of other individuals too. I'm certain that everybody in this room right now is aware of how completely the print media, and above all the print media in Australia, have changed for the worse in the last few years, commercially, intellectually and ethically. You have only to look at the typos in just about any issue of Australia's newspapers to realise how totally the rot has set in a technical sense. It's not just the predominant content shortcomings, after all, that's hardly new. It's more the simple truth that virtually every edition of every Australian newspaper now contains typos and grammatical and factual errors which a decade ago would have been unthinkable. They're perfectly capable of turning up in the lead story on page 1. As recently as a decade ago, that simply did not happen. One of Sean McAuliffe's wittiest sketches on his Mad as Hell television show had a brilliant expose of the whole journalistic mindset. This expose described that mindset better than I could hope to do. I particularly treasure the sections of the sketch dominated by Cardamom Pie, the editor-in-residence at Fairfax's regional media output hub in Tullamarine. If you haven't encountered Cardamom Pie, be assured he is the epitome of every obese, purple-faced, boozy, fast-talking, incompetent elderly male bogan who ever worked at an Australian newspaper. He has acquired just enough digital jargon to sound impressive, but not nearly enough of any language to make his meaning clear. I can't resist quoting 4 choice pearls of Cardamom Pie's wisdom. 1. Quality and quantity are 2 different words, although granted interchangeable now that the sub-editors are gone. 2, it's simple freakonomics, Sean. You just ask any of our former business writers now doing spec work for Pop Sugar and Mamma Mia. 3, punctuation is irrelevant. Haven't you ever read James Joyce? 4, this is the future of print media, Sean, able to fit directly onto the iPhone 7 screen and written entirely by Twitter bots in Malaysia. Possibly even more horrible, but certainly more candid, is the sketch's other main character, Chris Lorax, the graphic designer for tabloids, who tells Sean, and these are his exact words, by reducing the text content to nil, we match our customers' desire to read with our staff's ability to write, unquote. To anyone like me whose publication history goes back to the 1980s, this sketch is horribly accurate. It showed, as no textbook could, why it was now increasingly impossible to get work in print anywhere, let alone to get work in print and paid for. I'd like to say that this sort of thing was confined to Australia. Unfortunately, that's not true. It might not be as bad elsewhere as it is here, but it's still very active in other countries. I noticed in 2016 that Time magazine in America, let me emphasize again, Time magazine, not some half-witted undergraduate broadsheet, had listed Evelyn Waugh among the 100 greatest female writers of all time. That is not a joke. Time magazine really did say that. When serious publications with worldwide audiences are run by staffers so utterly clueless that they seriously imagine Evelyn Waugh was a female, and when perhaps more to the point, no one in authority at these publications corrects this elementary howler before the edition gets to the newsstands, you realise afresh that you really do need to take a rain check. I was getting increasingly tired also of the mindless defamation which one endures online again and again, usually from complete strangers, although I had to launch a court case against a cyber stalker who wasn't a complete stranger. I won't go into his bizarre effusions about the size of my genitalia. Suffice it to say that he was rewarded with an extremely cushy writing gig at Spectator Australia, where he's remained ever since. Anyway, this is mild enough stuff compared with what full-time media stars are now forced to endure via Twitter accounts, or compared with what nurses and paramedics and police officers now have to endure in the flesh. But it was quite enough to confirm the uselessness of trying to stay in journalism, despite or because of the fact that the print media had been my life's vocation, and that apart from some organ playing, I had no idea of how to earn a crust at my age. Anyway, after 18 months of unemployment and ill health, in August 2016, I was asked whether I'd ever considered becoming a school crossing guard. Well, naturally, I hadn't ever given a moment's thought to becoming a school crossing guard. But the job agency urged me to take the notion seriously, and I certainly did. Sure enough, I underwent the training in the role, I passed the medical exams, I became an accredited lollipop man, or as one of the school students at Melbourne very kindly said to me, "Hello, lollipop dude," and I was assigned to a school at Melbourne. I've been happily doing school crossing work ever since then, though I'm no longer at Melbourne, and overall, it provided me with much needed regular sums of money. Not huge sums of money, but oh, the joy of being able to rely on any sort of regular income, fortnight after fortnight after fortnight, instead of frantically sending out job applications which 99% of the time just get ignored, or sending out invoices which a lot of the time just get ignored. The all-time record for invoices, and probably other people have a lot greater records of this is just my all-time record, was the 7 months that the Catholic Weekly took to pay $150. Anyway, secondly, the regular sums of money and the social interaction which work as a lollipop dude entails had a very beneficial effect on my overall health, as did the fact that, also in August 2016, I acquired a cat. Lord Oscar, who has rather gone viral on Facebook, and who is the co-dedicatee of the Gates of Vienna, as you can discover from the back page of the booklet. Lo and behold, towards the end of 2017, I suddenly realised, thanks to my lollipopper work, I salted away enough money to start serious CD plans after all. It was through the recommendation of musical colleagues that I first met the brilliant recording producer Thomas Grubb, here this evening, whose extraordinary diligence and skill did more than any other single factor to make the whole recording possible. If people enjoy this CD, it's due very largely to Thomas Grubb's expertise. In a recent article for a Hobart music periodical called Cut Common, I wrote some sentences which I'll take the liberty of quoting here. Quote, "Digital microphones compel a terrifying focus upon fine details. Analog recordings concealed and forgave far more. Hence the thumps, squeaks and page turns now audible in CD remasterings of many ancient classical LPs. Hence, too, the 78 RPM epoch's relaxed technical attitude, which enabled Arthur Schnabel and Alfred Cortot to leave on their piano recordings finger slips in a profusion unthinkable now. This means that one must correct not just each wrong note, but each even slightly insecure sounding right note. Can you imagine how many insecure sounding right notes an organist, however experienced, plays during sessions 15 hours long? Amid such fatigues, expenses, grandeurs and miseries, would I do it all again? On balance, yes. The recording producer is almost as effective in social and artistic levelling capacity as is the Grim Reaper. Every musician, however confident, tends to be terrified of recording processes. So one arrives at a state of curious egalitarianism, knowing that even the awesomely gifted and assured pianist Vladimir Horowitz required discreet backroom titivation to remove wrong notes before his live 1965 Carnegie Hall recital could be unleashed upon the world, unquote. Anyhow, at least the Gates of Vienna is now out there. Es ist vollbracht, it is accomplished, to cite the name of a Bach aria. Here's hoping that a CD title and subtitle, which include the magic words Vienna, Baroque, Habsburg and Empire, will countervail the sales deterrent factor notoriously afflicting the word organ. Let's face it, there are millions of people who find organ music perhaps the world's greatest turn-off, along with bed socks and Star Trek conventions. In an article which appeared in Crisis magazine 6 years ago, I noted that in terms of doomed chat-up lines for approaching the opposite sex, the phrase "I'm an organist" must rank somewhere alongside "I'm an accountant" or "I majored in Swiss constitutional law." 6 years on, this is surely still true. So I'd like to think that music lovers who shy away from organ music in general might find this release more attractive than a gigantic box set of organ repertoire would be. For me, to conclude, the single most enjoyable aspect of having made the recording is also the most frightening aspect of having made the recording, namely that I must accept the ultimate responsibility for it. My debts to Thomas Grubb and to the design team at Replicat and to the distribution team at Ditto Music and of course to the Caroline Chisholm Library for permitting this launch to take place, these are debts so big that I can never hope to repay them. But henceforth, the commercial success or the commercial failure of the Gates of Vienna is something that I have to take on my own shoulders. With all 4 of the books that I've written and had published, it was totally different. There were PR gurus, journalistic gurus, graphic design gurus who had to be propitiated, and lots of people who threw their weight around because after all they were the experts, they knew what they were doing. Sometimes, yes, they did indeed know what they were doing. Sometimes, on the other hand, they didn't have much of a clue. In one case, they were so addicted to LSD that I'm amazed they could get out of bed before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, let alone front up a publishing company. But hey, they were the experts, and I was just a clueless step of veteran. So who was I to question this judgment? That's not happening with the Gates of Vienna. Everything about promoting it, from the cover design to the setting up of an Amazon selling portal, needs to be my own effort and my own bookkeeping and my own queuing up at Australia Post to mail out copies. These requirements have entailed big responsibilities, but they've also entailed a sense of clarity, a sense of loose ends having been tied up. Most of you will remember the sign that Harry Truman had on his desk at the Oval Office when he was president. It simply consisted of 4 words, "The buck stops here." Well, that's how I feel about the Gates of Vienna. Normally, when there's a CD launch, the musicians whose CD it is actually perform live a few extracts from it. Well, that's not possible when you're an organist or even when you're Count Dracula. So, I was wondering, would you like to hear 2 very short tracks from the CD itself?
Yes.
Okay. organ recording that ended with a sort of Aaron Copland type hoedown, so I wanted to be the first. Thanks very much.